All right, it's 3 o'clock. Thank you all for coming. This workshop, budget workshop will come to order. Thank you. So, Ms. Contreras, please take a silent roll call so that we're all here today. And item number 1, workshop to discuss fiscal year 2023-24 budget. Mr. Neese.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and good afternoon to town staff and the residents that are present today. Last week, you heard from the balance of our municipal staff. They outlined their roles, responsibilities, and workload. The common theme with each position is we have a small staff, and with the small staff, you wear many hats to cover the operational requirements as well as the municipal requirements associated with operating government. Today, we'll do a deeper dive into the numbers behind the last workshop. These are the topics that we'll discuss today. Once again, similar to the last format in the first workshop, as typical, this is a discussion between staff and the town council. At the end of the discussion, if residents would like to speak, please fill out a speaker form and give it to Candace, our town clerk, and then the mayor will call upon the respective speakers at the end. This slide graphically represents the overall timeline associated with the budget preparation. At this point in time, we are sharing the data we collected January through April, which provides the foundation for the budget. In June, the bottom line expenditure limit is established, and in July, the budget hearing is considered and approved to begin the next fiscal year. Fundamentally, when evaluating a municipal budget, every council is charged with evaluating the 4 attributes of solvency for a local community: cash solvency, budget solvency, long-range solvency, and service solvency. Cash solvency is obviously the ability to pay one's bill. Budget solvency is the ability to balance the budget. We are not the federal government. We don't have a printing press below town hall. Therefore, expenses cannot exceed revenues. It's the bottom line. Long-range solvency deals with the ability to pay future expenses with the balance of the town's revenue stream culminating from local sales taxes. It's imperative to seek economic development initiatives which reduce the volatility of this revenue stream through business diversification. The final attribute is service solvency, the ability to provide needed and desired levels of municipal services. The model in Carefree has always been and continues to be limited service model based upon core municipal services to once again ensure compliance with state and local laws. Now let's switch gears and focus on the forecasted revenues for the next fiscal year. As I've shown each year, this slide is a visual representation of the town's revenue model. On average, between 75% and 80% of the town's annual revenue is derived from local revenue streams, which consist of municipal sales tax and cost recovery model assessed for specific services. The other, approximately 20 to 25%, arises from state share revenue. Therefore, every year during the budget process, we must balance the weight of our core municipal services on this very precarious stool. The next series of slides will illustrate this reconciliation. At a high level, these are the forecasted revenue streams for the next fiscal year. As I noted, state shared revenue on this slide is inflated this year due to the one-time revenue that I'll explain a little bit later. Approximately 74% of our revenue is derived from local fees collected from municipal sales tax and assessment of cost recovery fees. It's important to note, and included in the municipal sales tax line is one-time revenue from new construction, estimated to be about $400,000 this next fiscal year. Let's now take a deeper dive into these forecasted revenue streams. This graphic illustrates the sales tax performance since 2006. The importance of this base year or starting point is this is when the full amount of the 3% was assessed. So starting in 2006 is when we increased our sales tax from 2% to 3% to cover the master contract with Rural Metro. And as we have explained in nauseam over the past couple years, of residents originally had their own subscription service and paid directly rural Metro for that subscription service. We modified that in 2005 and adopted a sales tax, 1% dedicated to cover that master contract. So in 2006 is when our sales tax increased to 3%. So this shows the body of history associated with that 3% sales tax. As this graphic illustrates, over this 17-year period of time, an average of $3.44 million was collected, or $1.2 million per each 1%. However, over the last 5 years, this total municipal sales tax collection averaged $4.34 million, or about $1.45 million per each 1%. As you can see from the previous slide, we're estimating about $4.4 million projected for this next fiscal year, which is in alignment with this 5-year average. It must be noted that sales tax revenue tracks with the performance of our local businesses, and therefore, we must analyze the threats to this revenue stream. Two of the most notable threats are the closure of top producers. The recent closure, as of last weekend, of CVS Pharmacy illustrates this risk. And state legislative initiatives, which reduced the local streams in this in recent past. It was the construction sales tax that was recalibrated, and hundreds of thousands of dollars were lost as a result of that recalibration of that construction sales tax at the state level. Most recently, during the last legislative cycle, the elimination of rental tax and grocery tax were discussed. Good, bad, or indifferent, this means hundreds of thousands of dollars to Carefree alone if it's eliminated. These are risks that are real, whether they're economic or whether they're legislative. And we have to understand that and look at diversifying our sales tax model to help offset that potential risk. This slide helps to outline the opportunities for comparing the 10-year trend, when comparing the 10-year trend of sales tax revenue per payment category to the last full year of sales tax collection. Retail is typically the largest due to a few of the big box stores within the town. Once again, if one of these exit, it would produce a significant void in the town's revenue stream and solvency. The retail line has experienced a decrease of 4% over the last 10-year average, while corresponding increase has been experienced in online sales. Moving forward, it will be interesting to see the performance of online sales as local consumers adapt to these online portals. Another element to note is the role of construction sales tax. As this community reaches build-out, this construction sales tax revenue will not be indicative of past performance. This is important because these revenues funded the capital reserve fund that we know today. The erosion of this revenue stream will result in a significant reduction in this capital reserve funding stream, while the cost to maintain the community's aging infrastructure will only increase over time. The number one economic driver in the state is tourism. Two of the components of tourism in our local economy are accommodations and restaurants and bars. These two areas have shown growth over this period of time and show the potential for future opportunities to enhance the town's revenue and insulate itself from the volatility in retail and the diminishing construction revenue. The second contributor of the town's local revenue correlates to the fees charged for services provided. The largest being building permits, which cover plan review and inspection services. Utility fees are associated with the various fees charged to local utilities to use the town's rights-of-way. The court fees are the fees Cave Creek pays Carefree to address the overhead to operate the court. The fines are also used to offset these respective costs. Rental income is associated with the water company renting space by the town's public work garage. And finally, license fees and vendor fees are associated with the various town license requirements. Combined, the total of these cost recovery fees is approximately $1.2 million. Once again, state shared revenue makes up about a quarter of the town's forecasted revenue for the next fiscal year. As I suggested earlier, there's a one-time revenue that is included under the state income tax line, and let me explain that. The one-time revenue is a result of the change in the calculus behind the state income tax. As many of you know, the state income tax recently changed to a 2.5% flat tax. As a result of this recalibration, part of the legislation increased the local contribution from 15% to 18% to minimize the financial impacts on local communities. Due to the fact that income tax is paid to local communities 2 years after it's collected, the new 18% threshold is being applied to the higher tax collections from 2 years ago. In 2 years, the collections from the flat tax will align with the new 18% apportionment, and the result in reduction of will result in a reduction of about $200,000 to $250,000 over what we're seeing today. As far as the other state shared revenue streams, the sales tax is estimated to increase very slightly, while both the flat gasoline tax, remember the flat gasoline tax is 18% per gallon, and the vehicle license tax remain relatively consistent. So that's our overall revenue stream and the forecast that we have over the next fiscal year. Any questions associated with the forecasted revenue stream at this point in time?
So I would just say a big takeaway is the factors that we can't control that impact sales tax revenue. So like CVS, like state legislature, and I think the state legislature still has the rental sales tax measure still in play, so it could still happen this year.
That could still happen, yes, yes.
It would be effective in 2025 if it passed.
And then construction sales tax. So I saw on here a drop, you show it going down to like 400K from say somewhere north of 500. And as we have less and less places to build, we'll have less and less
That is
construction
correct.
sales tax.
Yes.
So Gary, is it still the case that the internet sales tax we collect is based on our 85377 zip code?
That is correct, yes.
So they probably haven't devised a way to track people that live here that are using a zip code outside.
They have not. We've been in contact with the Department of Revenue. Obviously, a portion of our zip code, a portion of our town overlaps in the Cave Creek zip code, 85331. If there's purchases that occur there, it's assigned to that respective zip code according to the Department of Revenue. And that's true regardless of where you are within the state. There's places in Phoenix that have a Scottsdale zip code, and places in Scottsdale that have a Phoenix zip code, and places in Tempe that have a Scottsdale zip code. So it's true wherever you are. So there is a loss of sales tax right now, and the Department of Revenue they don't have a way to do it outside of that zip code at this point in time.
Gary, with the loss of CVS and the revenue derived from new build, from new construction, and our town being at, call it 80% build out, which in reality is closer to 100 because most of, a lot of the land is you can't build on, that is remaining. Where are we making up that deficit, and how much are we losing approximately based off of past revenue from CVS?
I can't go into the loss of CVS since it's a respective store and there's only one here, so I have to, it's proprietary information. There is a loss. The loss itself, obviously pharmaceuticals are not taxable, but all the retail product within CVS is taxable. They did do some decent business there, but it's not like losing a Lowe's. Lowe's would be a significant loss to the town of Carefree. But once again, we can't influence what happens in a boardroom. Many years ago, Bash's was looking at closing this store. They were in a contraction, and we had to go down there and kiss the ring of Eddie Basha to ensure that he did not close this store. And as a result of forming that relationship, and he, prided himself on being the local hometown grocer, we went down there and talked to him about that and what it meant to Carefree. He actually did the opposite and reinvested in that store. So what you see today is a result of those communications.
My understanding is that a lot of the alcohol sales come out of that store more so than many of the others in the valley. So, I mean, it's obvious that people are buying something there. So
Yes.
he's deriving some benefit. So I don't know that it was so much kissing the ring as
Yeah.
he's seeing some numbers come out of there as well that are benefiting them. But
They had a pretty sophisticated model that indicates the performance of the store, and this was not a high-performance store. So, yes, they do a decent job in selling liquor there. Our residents like to drink, but
Carefree is a happy place.
yeah. But at the end of the day, it was not a high-performing store. Now, word of caution, that store was bought by an outfit out of California.
yeah.
We don't know what the plan is for that outfit out of California. Now, Eddie Basha, long live his soul, he was great to work with and dedicated to work with us. I don't know if the same would be true with an outfit out of California. So we'll wait and see what that relationship produces. But that's the risk with our model right now, is we can't control what happens in a boardroom.
So what are we doing to try and fill whatever gaps have been created there?
That's all part of the economic development plan and diversification, is trying to insulate ourselves, looking at hospitality, looking at our restaurants, looking at obviously the Hampton Inn, good, bad, or indifferent. It generates traffic within the town center. There's direct benefits and indirect benefits. The overall combination of that direct and indirect helps to offset the liability that we assumed when the rural metro contract went up 20%, and also MCSO, as I'll explain a little bit further, is going up 17%. Collectively together, that's $385,000. That probably is more than what the Hampton Inn will generate for us over the next fiscal year. Yeah. So obviously they're going to build their business over there. They don't flip a switch and have business overnight. So we're hoping as they build that business, more people will come and patronize the restaurants and businesses in and around the town center. But hospitality, once again, we are immersed in the desert. There's a lot of people that come up here and enjoy the open space around us and go up to the lakes and enjoy some of the hot air ballooning that we have to the south and east of us. There's a lot of ecotourism in and around Carefree that people come up from Scottsdale and Paradise Valley. They do a great job with their tourism, but we could take a little bite of that and increase the hospitality up here. We do have the ocean, and with the ocean comes the infrastructure to support the people that come up here to visit. And if we can just tap into that resource, certainly that can help offset some of the liability that we're experiencing today and potentially tomorrow with the loss of that construction sales tax. Any more questions? Good questions. All right. Let's start focusing on the annual operation fund then. The general fund is essentially the big fund that our operation comes out of. There's 3 buckets within the general fund that fund public safety, human resources, and general operations. This slide illustrates the proportion of each one of these buckets relative to the whole general fund. As illustrated over the last 3 fiscal years, public safety has grown by the largest percentage, while both general operations and human resources have hovered around 30%. Now let's do a dive into the numbers behind these percentages. More than $2.8 million is being invested into public safety this next fiscal year. The law enforcement contract, as I stated earlier, will be increasing by 17%, or approximately $85,000. It's important to note that 85% of the costs associated with this contract are for personnel costs. So essentially, it's a labor-centric contract. A lot of the cost increases are associated with labor. The remaining law enforcement costs are associated with incarceration services, so we have a contract with Maricopa County for the jail fees. We have animal control, and we also have our town prosecutor, which is paid out of the law enforcement budget. All these are experiencing nominal increases this next fiscal year. From a fire and emergency medical service perspective, the rural metro contract is once again a labor-centric contract. We just contract with rural metro for the personnel. We own the firehouse and all the equipment in it. That contract this past year, as I indicated earlier, is going up or went up by approximately 20% or $300,000 this past year. During the remaining 42 months of the existing 5-year contract, this contract will increase by a compounded rate of 2.5% each fiscal year, or approximately cumulatively $150,000 over the remaining balance of the contract. At the end of the contract, as similar to past contracts with rural metro, an additional market adjustment is made to the contract, which will need to be negotiated at that time. In addition to the labor contract, incrementally over time, we budget for the replacement of the fire safety equipment, which approaches its useful life. These costs are programmed into this year's budget as well. Another item to note under the fire department budget is the brush truck. We received a grant to cover the entire cost of the brush truck from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. That was approximately $177,000. We paid out a 50% deposit this past fiscal year. That brush truck is due to be delivered next spring. At that point in time, we will pay the remaining balance. But there's additional equipment that we'll need to purchase over this next fiscal year to place on that truck. That's about another $50,000 to $75,000. We are working on some grants to help offset that expense. Hopefully we'll be successful with those respective grants. The fire truck, which we touched upon last week, is programmed into the capital program. It's estimated to be about $1 million. We're working on different solutions, working on possibly a quick delivery of a truck. We'll see if that's something that we can do. They do some demo trucks that between the gaps of the order, they can't just stop everything, so they start building other trucks. And those are called demo trucks. There's a possibility that we can take advantage of one of those gaps. So working with a couple of the vendors. If we go out through a bidding process and hire or purchase a truck, it will take about 2 to 3 years to get that truck delivered. So working on a process that hopefully can deliver a truck a lot sooner rather than later. Any questions with public safety? All right. Next part of the operation budget is the town's human resources. Human capital is an essential ingredient to any operation of any organization. There's a total of 17 full-time employees within the town. There was a statement made at last week's meeting that 4 positions were previously part-time. This is not accurate. Prior to the Great Recession, the town had 2 additional positions in the court, a gardener in the town gardens, a zoning inspector, a street maintenance project manager, and a contract engineer. These positions were eliminated or recalibrated. For example, the contract engineer position. Due to the reduction in the workload, we recalibrated this position to a partnership with the water company on a temporary basis. The agreement was with Greg Crossman when we hired him during the Great Recession. He came to us with a skill set of being a civil engineer. I asked him, with the reduction in the workload, if he could temporarily oversee the inspection services and plan review. The obvious answer was yes. He did that on a temporary basis. Post-recession, as the volume of work returned and unfunded state and federal mandates increase, such as the stormwater inspections that Mark articulated, and dust control inspections, the town transitioned back to the original model to shift to an in-house engineer to ensure full-time availability to address inquiries, which happen every day, the expansion of the workload, management of street maintenance projects, and drainage repairs. Once again, our infrastructure is not getting any younger. It takes time to manage this and prepare strategic plans and implement those plans and go out and bid these respective projects. On top of the plan review, we talked about the building department, 2,300 site visits this past year. That's shared amongst planning and zoning, the building department, and the town engineer, because there's site plan and drainage issues that the town engineer has to go out and evaluate. There's planning and zoning issues that the planning and zoning director has to go out and evaluate. There's building safety issues that the building official has to go out and evaluate. Town staff remains at the same post-recession levels and below the pre-recession levels that had a total of 5 additional personnel, as I just listed. Furthermore, let's quickly compare the benchmark communities such as Cave Creek, which has a similar workload to Carefree. Cave Creek has a total of 29 positions servicing the same municipal functions as Carefree, with the exception 2 of Carefree's 17 positions operate the court. That court, as we know, also services cases in Cave Creek. So essentially, we have 15 positions to Cave Creek's 29 positions that serve the same municipal functions. From a salary and benefit perspective, Cave Creek's 29 employees are compensated according to their recently approved budget to a tune of over $3.7 million. Carefree's 17 full-time employees are forecast to be compensated this next fiscal year at an overall rate which includes salary and benefits of $2.06 million. Therefore, comparing these two communities, Carefree is receiving value from its smaller staffing model. As I stated last week, the value is based upon the roles and responsibilities within the organization, the education, the professional credentials, and the experiences and tenures and benchmarking the position with similar communities in the local market area. Indeed, as suggested at the last town council meeting, if the town council wishes to have a certified HR specialist conduct a compensation analysis, it would provide additional clarity. However, we can also learn from the recent analysis that Cave Creek has conducted a few years back. The overall salaries and benefits line is forecast to increase by 3.6% this overall year from the current fiscal year. This includes an increase of 4.5% in health insurance rates and a cost of living adjustment of 4.7% based upon the CPI labor index. Any questions with HR?
Yeah, so that number from Cave Creek to 29, does that include their utilities?
That does not include their utilities. If
So
you include their utilities, obviously it's I believe north of 45 or 50 people.
Okay, okay, so it's a fair comparison.
Yes, yes.
And if we look at the 4.7 COLA, so just from reading the newspaper, my understanding was Phoenix had one of the highest inflation rates in the country. So how does that, roughly like 8% or something, so how does that translate into a 4.7% COLA?
This is from the Bureau of Labor, United States Bureau of Labor. So I can't tell you how they mathematically adjust for that, but this is based on a local labor index.
And then, my last question, are there any merit increases baked into this?
This is just a 4.7% cost of living adjustment.
So I would just suggest, going forward, maybe in out years, that we consider merit increases where it's appropriate.
Okay. And from a comparison perspective, Cave Creek is looking at 6% and doing another compensation study to see where their salary ranges are relative to the local market area. So they're going through another benchmarking exercise.
So across the board, 6%.
Yes,
Thank you.
I think Social Security went up 8.3 in
yes,
January.
yes.
So this cost of living adjustment is at a deficit compared to the local market then? This isn't even a,
No, this is what the cost of living increase is. So a lot of the local HR departments are using this as their COLA for this next fiscal
okay,
year.
but based on Metro Phoenix, which is what the mayor stated was closer to 8, or at least what their projection is.
I haven't seen that figure. I think that's the inflationary index is 8% this past year, but that was not the labor index.
Yeah, so I think there's lots of different indexes. I mean,
Yes.
People in the business know better than
Yeah.
me.
We use the egg index.
Oh, okay,
There's the whatever it takes to keep people index too.
yes.
Out of curiosity, they're 29 versus our 17. Where's the significant difference on a comparable department basis?
Every department has a bench behind them in Cave Creek. Their planning and zoning department, the salary and benefits line was about 1.25 million. They have about 5 people in their planning and zoning department, which includes their building official. That is probably the largest department. The next is administration. They have several financial positions within their department. They have a clerk and assistant clerk. I think they have a management analyst for their town manager. So there's a bench with each one of those positions there.
So the 12 people are sprinkled all over the department?
Yes, yes. So, all right, moving on. The final area under the general fund is operation costs, and these costs include organizational fees and permits, utility maintenance costs and repairs, materials and supplies, contract services for landscape maintenance in the gardens and medians, janitorial service, legal and risk management services. The overall total is $1.9 million. Obviously, the largest one here is Public Works. There's a lot of materials and supplies that go into the department. We're looking at purchase of a kick broom, a replacement of a antiquated piece of equipment that's important during our storm cleanup. That itself is about $120,000, and obviously is something critical when we have the monsoons to have access to that. And ours just keeps on breaking down, and there's a point in time where you just can't keep on repairing it. You might as well replace it. So we're looking at replacing that within that budget there. But that is probably the most significant expense within the operational budget, and the rest is just keeping the lights on and paying the utilities and the other permit fees that we're required to pay our big brothers, the state and federal government. So any questions with operations? All right. So that's our overall operation budget, pretty straightforward. Now let's quickly switch gears. We went through our capital projects last week. We estimate about $7.4 million in capital improvements are planned over the course of the next fiscal year. Approximately 4.4 are forecast to come out of our capital reserve fund, while the remaining balance is anticipated to come from grants. So some of those grants are the drainage grant that we received from the flood control district to a tune of $400,000 and approximately $90,000. We also received some regional funds, some federal funds coming for pedestrian crosswalks, so making some improvements to Tom Darlington. That's our third year of applying for those pedestrian crosswalk grants, and we finally got some funding. So that was a significant shift. Once again, about $600,000 in improvements within the town center. Our street project, which will be the streets that wrap around Black Mountain on the west, south, and east side, about $3 million in a street project. And then the water infrastructure project, Greg went through and Greg is present and can address any questions with that. That is the capital aid and advance loan that we have historically had with the water company that made improvements to the original Carefree system. And once again, the balance of original Carefree, the east side of the mountain here, was done prior to incorporation. So a lot of the areas were platted. They weren't platted under our subdivision ordinance today. Under our subdivision ordinance today, it requires fire hydrants every 550 feet, and obviously water lines that would serve those fire hydrants. It's nice to put those fire hydrants in, but if you don't have the infrastructure to support it, it doesn't work. So our subdivision ordinance was adjusted many years ago to facilitate that. But original Carefree, we're left with the legacy of limited fire hydrants. We do have a few areas that we're trying to extend those fire hydrants to, and Greg went through that in the presentation last week, and that's once again the original part of the Carefree system. And the final element is the fire truck replacement, and hopefully I can get it south of that number, but that's just a budget figure, so we'll see how that flushes out. So a potential of up to $4.4 million coming out of our capital reserve fund.
Gary,
Yes.
do we get any money on the sale of our old equipment?
Certainly we can sell it. The market for fire trucks is not proving to be something that you could get a tangible return on. So we'll see. One of our requirements is to put it on a bid, online bid portal. So we just can't sell it to anybody. So we will look at, obviously, that online bid portal and put it out there and see what we can get for that old fire truck. Another option is just to keep it in-house and keep it as backup, but we may not need it as backup in the future, so it might be better just to sell it. This is the budget dashboard that I provide every year, and it's a quick glance at the proposed budget. In summary, the overall operations side, we're looking at anticipated $7.6 million in revenue, approximately $7 million in expenses. The one-time surplus attributed to construction sales tax, as well as the state income tax is that $600,000. That can go to the capital projects that we have programmed into this fiscal year to offset those liabilities. Once again, we're looking at approximately $7.4 million in capital investments over the next year. That could imply that we take $4.4 million out of our reserve fund, leaving an estimated $9 million. Now, the idea of budgeting is it's a forecast. This is a forecast. So we could have a residual in our capital reserve fund of $9 million after we make these investments into our infrastructure this year. Could we have more than $9 million? Yes. Could we have less? Potentially. But this is where we forecasted it to be at the end of this fiscal year.
Is the rainy day fund part of the 9?
The rainy day fund is not.
So the bottom line is, if it goes according to plan, at least our estimates, is just an estimate. Come June 30th, 2024, we would have $9 million plus $2.5 million in reserves and rainy day fund, respectively.
Correct, yes. So overall, it's anticipated that the budget will be about $14.8 million. So that's taking our infrastructure investments, our investments in our general fund, and then the historic WIFA loan. If you remember, the WIFA loan was a 20-year loan to improve a 1 million-gallon tank at the the northeast corner of Stagecoach and Pima. Nobody sees it because it's underground. It's a 1 million-gallon tank. That was over, I think, $3.5 million at that time 20 years ago. We borrowed money through WIFA, and then incrementally the water company pays us back. So that's included in this overall number, the respective arrangement there. So overall budget is $14.8 million. Now, if you compare that, Cave Creek's budget right now, which includes their utilities, is about $56 million. Scottsdale is about 2.5 billion with a B. Phoenix is about the same amount. So you can see our overall budget is a rounding error when it comes down to some of these adjacent communities. So, Mayor, members of the council, that concludes my remarks and the budget numbers today. We have associated with the agenda a draft of the budget narrative that was put out with that agenda. You can also find it online so the citizens can click at the top of our website, which now says town budget, and there's the presentation from last week, there's this budget document, and there'll be this presentation from this week. So at this time, Mayor, if there's any additional questions, be glad to address them, and now's also the time that the residents can also give you their feedback.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, Gary, can you tell me what the major difference is between our $14.8 million budget versus Cave Creek's $56 million? I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, they're looking at roads too. They're looking at bringing them up to speed. They had a lot of dirt roads originally. They did a chip seal over those roads. They have to obviously invest in that chip seal that degrades relatively quickly without a solid base there. So they're investing in their roads. They're investing in water infrastructure. They have they're more robust as far as some of the infrastructure that they have that we don't have. So they're a lot of the stuff is infrastructure related,
So we're 8.8.
as well as staff.
Yeah,
I mean,
so, yeah, we
yeah.
know the staff. So we're 8.8 square miles.
Mhm.
How big is Cave Creek in a
It's-
relative
I
basis?
don't, yeah, I,
It's 39?
39. Yeah, and a balance of that is open space. So you might recall the state land that they acquired, and they did a density shift and rezoned about 220 acres along Carefree Highway to a regional commercial center. That's there today. And then Spur Cross Ranch, the town of Carefree contributed $100,000 to Spur Cross Ranch to help seed the effort, and then they adopted a tax to essentially secure that. So a significant amount of the landmass in Cave Creek, as a result of these big chunks of land that were contiguous and owned by one respective party, they were able to preserve through different cooperatives.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think a big difference is that 56 million includes their sewer and water utility. So that budget is included in there.
Yep.
I don't know how many miles of roads they have, so we say we have 100, they have a lot more than that. Okay, any other comments from council? Okay, so now we'll go to public comment. And if anyone would like to speak, we have these forms over on the table, so please fill them out. I have a few of them here. And all we ask is you come up to the podium and you state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. So first is Mr. Bill Dougherty.
Good afternoon. Bill Doherty, 7818 East Long Rifle Road. As a small business owner for 30-some years, it strikes me as that the narrative seems to be primarily focused on how to get additional revenue. I know public service is different than business, as opposed to what costs can be cut and what expenses can be reduced. My question is, what internal procedures are in place to focus on spending cuts? What exercises are done within the city and the town that focus on how to cut costs as a business would, as opposed to where we're going to get new revenue? For example, our town staffing and hiring decisions, are they made by who? And how are those performance is measured? You know, are they, in a small business, each one of those is a very big expense. What would we do? $121,000 a person for 17 people, to me, seems really high. but I'm not in the public service, so are those expenses reviewed, and who reviews them? I mean, and are those performances done to make sure that we're getting our money's worth, basically? And how is, the thing that hits me too is this fire and emergency. If we can't afford to have fire and emergency, which it seems like we can't, you know, we have an expense revenue imbalance there. Has it been considered, even legally, to return to the subscription service? When I was here 20 years ago, the town didn't have that expense. Now it seems to be a big burden. But can it, and has it been reconsidered to go back to a subscription service? Might be out of the box, but is it and can it be considered? Are all the capital expenditures competitively bid? And if so, who does them? How much time is put in on those? I hear the comment that a $900,000 fire truck, if we can get it faster, is better than bidding it out. Is that right? I don't know. Seems like a lot of money. And the fire truck, what is it, 24 years old? Can it be repaired? As a business expense, if we didn't have the $900,000 to buy a truck, I'd look at what's the life of the existing truck and what's the need for a new truck. Again, all these are probably already known by everybody, but it's interesting to me that we throw a $900,000 number around. I don't know, you know, if that's really needed. Has leasing equipment been considered for a temporary or part-time street sweeping machine? You know, in business, if we need something for part-time, we compare the cost to have a capital expenditure to an expense of leasing it when we need it. Possibility. Are all the consultants competitively bid? Thank you. Just in general, are there processes in place to look at cost reduction as opposed to revenue increases?
Okay, thank you. Okay. Mr. John Mattis.
Just so everyone can hear me, get this up a little bit. Good afternoon. John Mattis, Graythorne Circle, Carefree. There are a couple of things in the budget presentation that are confusing. One is the overall department operation expenses. Nothing is broken down that I can see in the budget. Then find out that the $289,603 in public works from 2003 to 2024 is going to be what I would consider a capital improvement or capital expense to replace a piece of equipment. I don't think that should be there. It's confusing for a resident to look at this. The large expenses increases, risk management went up 89,000, municipal court 11,000, community development 177,000 from 2022 to 2023. What is the reason for those large expenses? It would make more sense for me to be broken down. Same thing with different departments. You say you have 2-3 people in a department with one amount for salaries. I'd love to see it broken down by position. Who's the public works director? What's he make? What's a street sweeper make? What's a street worker make? As far as different salaries, it would make sense to me to see that as a resident. Why there isn't a capital improvement or a capital equipment in the budget? In other words, do we put money into a capital equipment fund to be able to draw from versus going into one giant pot that's usually used for road repairs? Same thing with capital or equipment replacement program. Is there an equipment replacement program in the budget? If you have a computer that goes out, you have the money. You don't have to go for a resolution to council to buy. I think the last year was every single computer in the town. You ended up having to make a resolution. This way you wouldn't have to make a resolution. You go in, grab the money, buy the piece of equipment that you need. And lastly, what I would like to see is Mr. Geiger is no longer a council person. Thank him for his service, but I don't think his picture or his little paragraph should be in the budget. This is a draft budget, it's not an approved budget, and he's not gonna be approving the budget. So the 40% increases in the department operation expenses approximately, I think should be broken down a lot better than what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Stephanie Barbour.
Just have a really quick question. Stephanie Barber, Carefree resident. I actually would like to understand why the Carefree Water Company is requesting a $2 million loan for the Peaceful Place Booster Pump Station and the Silver Saddle project. Both of these projects were included as part of the original water consolidation project and paid for by the revenue bond. During the water company's February 2021 presentation, Mr. Crossman explained that $3.5 million of the revenue bond would be earmarked for improvements to the existing Carefree Water infrastructure. This would cover the Silver Saddle project, which is part of the historical water company infrastructure. And in November of 2021, Carefree entered into a construction administration services contract with Coe and Van Loo. Both the Silver Saddle project and the Peaceful Place booster pump were included in this contract. So I'd like to understand why Carefree Water Company is asking for another $2 million loan and an $800,000 federal grant for two projects that have already been included in the original project. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to fill out a chit and come on up? Okay, so that'll close the public comment. Mr. Neese, maybe you can address some of these questions?
Yes, as far as cost reductions, that's the reconciliation we do every year. Part of the management of this town, it's a collaborative fashion. We worked on a work plan, a strategic work plan, that speaks of the task of each one of our positions. We recalibrated the entire town staff during the Great Recession and reduced the number of staff. Bottom line, each position is a requirement, whether through local statute or state statute. We have to process building cases. That requires expertise to process. You need a town engineer that's licensed. You need building official that's certified. You need planning and zoning expertise to carry out those respective roles. You have financial transparency requirements that we're required to comply with. You have checks and balances that you need. And one of the things that's called out on our annual audit is obviously we should have more positions than we do, and you need to have those checks and balances. So, that's why some communities like Cave Creek have more people in their financial department. So we are very minimal as far as our staffing. I don't know how you become more efficient. We looked at contracting these positions too. The issues with contract positions is the folks are not always in the community. They represent other communities and they also have projects in the private sector. And so they're not always available. It's very frustrating if you're building a project, investing your resources in a community and there's nobody there to assist you in that permitting process. So those historically don't work out well. And it's one of the issues that we had early on in this community back in the late 90s is they were trying to contract out every position and people were frustrated. They couldn't get their permits pulled in a timely fashion. Today there's requirements to process these permits in a timely fashion that weren't in place back then. So legally we're obligated to process these things. We can't meet those times with those respective contracts. So it is a collaborative fashion. We talk about how we can be more efficient every year during these budget discussions. There's nothing hidden here. We're very transparent. As far as capital expenditures, we go through a bid process with our capital projects. Mark has led us through the last couple cycles with our street projects. There's a bidding process with each one of those. We go through that bureaucratic process every year. So we ensure that what we do goes through that procurement process. As far as the fire truck, I talked about a quick delivery. That would be procured through a state co-op, which is a publicly vetted and a competitive process to get the best price at the state level, and we would take advantage of that pricing. So that wouldn't be something that would not be bid out. It would be bid out through that cooperative that we are a member of. Leasing equipment is something that we always explore. Bottom line, when you have a storm event, all hands are on deck. We live in a rural community that has a lot of wet wash crossings, and when we need the equipment and you have to go out and lease it, they have to deliver it. It's not done in a timely fashion. When you're trying to drive to the grocery store and that street is not cleaned and there's a bunch of debris there, we get a lot of calls. So this is critical for us to ensure that those streets are clean. That kick broom is an important part of cleaning those streets. And it's has a lot of wear and tear on it. I mean, 20 plus years of abuse. Consultants also, we go through a competitive process with the consultants. That's part of what we do. As far as risk management and the increases associated with that, we get through Southwest Risk what do they call it? A credit each year.
Yeah, we actually get a premium reimbursement.
A premium.
Or it's a credit.
Okay. So we don't know what that credit will be when we prepare the budget. That comes at a later date. But we have to prepare for what the actual cost will be from a risk management perspective. So we get numbers during that January to April timeframe from the risk management pool. We put those numbers into our budget, and then we apply at a later date the credit that's applied against that overall cost. And that varies from year to year based upon the pool's claims. So that will have an impact on it. So I was just trying to read my chicken scratch here. I thought I touched upon the fire truck there. Equipment replacement program, that's something that Mark has been working on, programming all the equipment replacement for the Public Works. Tony, once again, this is a living and breathing document right now. The draft that was put up in association with the agenda has been revised, and obviously Tony's vacant position is now posted there too. So if you look at the latest draft, which is on the town's website, it will show that has been removed. And the water project, I can pass that baton on to Greg to address.
So one question that was brought up, we have a capital improvement fund, where most of our money is. So the concept of having a fund for equipment that we know will have a life, we can actually forecast it. And that may have been done by the town in the past, I don't recall. But it's maybe a better way to manage our reserves. So just throw that out there, and maybe it has some merit. Because we can forecast the town, the Public Works, some of their assets have a life. We know pretty much what they're going to do year in and year out, how many miles they're driving.
And that's something that is work in progress. Mark has started that process to evaluate all that equipment and assign the useful life to each one of those assets, and then have a replacement schedule. So that was part of his workload.
Gary, I have a question, and while it's been suggested to a discussion of eliminating staff, have we looked the other way to see with each department what in reality to bring departments up to speed, like other municipalities are run, what it would take to fill certain positions in, you know, in a normal situation, in other municipalities where, so for example, City of Tempe may have 3 people in, or 4 or 5 people in this department, we have 1 or 2. I mean, have we done any type of comparison? Relatively speaking, I know we're on a much smaller scale, but to look the other way, what does it take, you know, how many positions do we need to have a normal staffed department within each department in our town?
I have not done that exercise. What have other communities done? I know
Right.
the hierarchy of many organizations when I go to.
Do you know what I'm asking, though?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Because I think we need to do that study, to be able to kind of, again, no disrespect to anybody, but to put this to rest. The
Yep.
fact that we have to keep cutting positions when our staff is working beyond what, you know, any other normal situation would be. And to examine within each department, okay, we have Jim who is serving as an HR director and also our IT manager. Well, those 2 positions are obviously 2 separate positions.
Correct.
So if we did that type of study, the other study regarding salaries, and in determining what the average 4 positions are and how we rank, because we've had this discussion before, and how we would rank versus other municipalities and having to stay competitive in the marketplace also. I think those would be very important.
I mean, typically, salary ranges are not averages. They're based on typically experience. So there's the minimum, you know, the midpoint and the high point. Because obviously if someone comes in with 2 years' experience
Right.
versus 25 years, they're not gonna make the same amount of money.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, it's not an average, it's.
But we need something as
yes,
a
I agree.
baseline, something
I
to
agree.
measure, so.
Well, there's another way to look at it too, I did a lot of financial analysis in my time like Sheila has. If you look at each department and you look at the full-time equivalent and you look at the tasks that must be performed and the required hours of each task, including unfunded mandates, that becomes man-hours required versus actual man-hours available. And if you have a deficit, it's simple, you have to pay overtime, or you don't get everything done. But if you shake that out by department, because we know how many hours people work, and we know what the tasks are, and we know we do have one-offs, emergencies, we have storms, things like that. But if we take a look at that, my gut tells me we're gonna have a negative number at the end of all that. Just
And
an opinion.
what's gonna happen if we lose one of those people in a key position that does multiple jobs? How much is it gonna cost to train multiple people to do those multiple positions?
And that includes cross-training. You can't cross-train engineers, right?
Gary? Just to ensure standards are met, when we acquire a piece of equipment such as a fire truck or any capital expense like that, are we required to go through a state agency that oversees that procurement process, once again, to ensure the standards of the equipment?
We can either go through our own independent bid process, or we could go through a co-op, a state contract. Those are all publicly procured and go through a competitive process. And then
They
we could
would do all that
piggyback,
for
we
us.
could piggyback on that. So when I spoke about the fire truck, it was not to circumvent that process. It was take advantage of the state procured process and then purchase a fire truck through that co-op.
Is that a service, does the state charge a fee for that service?
No, we don't have a fee for that.
So actually, the fire truck you were talking about, it's like a demo truck, costs less than a non-demo truck, I guess is the way to say it.
Correct.
So even though it comes in like $900,000 or so, it's a bargain
Yep. Yep.
relative to a new, one that is not a demo truck.
But-
It's like buying a,
Once again, looking at creative ways of how to do business. I mean, this is a creative way of how to save money. I mean, speak of creative models. The Consolidated Court did not operate up until about 8 years ago. Gee, how did that come about? It came about because I proposed it to Cave Creek. And we cultivated an IGA to share on that staff. Now that works because they essentially oversee the same type of laws and implement that universal through the office of the court. So there's the equipment that we share with Cave Creek that operates the court. And we benefit from sharing on that staff. Wouldn't work well with planning and zoning or some of the other tasks that we have. Just doesn't. But the court, it does. And it's become a model court for the state where small communities are adopting the same consolidated approach. And so fundamentally, we've looked at creative ways of how to save money, to be efficient, and employ conservative practices. So it's just ingrained in who I am. I mean, I've always looked at conservative ways of trying to approach our business. And that's how we built up our reserves. I mean, we're lucky to have the reserves that high right now. But once again, that funding will diminish over time as that historical revenue stream goes down as we reach build out. And the costs of that infrastructure do not decrease, they only increase. So, you know, we're trying to think, okay, we know that this is coming to us. Let's look at diversification. Let's look at ways to ensure that we continue to pay the bills. And our bills, like everybody else's bills, do not go down. They continue to escalate. But we continue to look at ways of saving money. So those are just some of the things that we've evaluated.
To go to another question that was asked about fire service and paying for our rural metro service. So right now, we may very likely have to dip into the general fund to make it whole. Right? So we have that 1% that funds a good part of the rural metro contract, and then if it doesn't generate enough revenue, then we pull some out of the general fund. In the past, it's been $300,000 to $400,000 on average. The good news is that we're going to roll into an extension of our current contract, and in the out years, the increase per the contract is only 2.5%. And that contract will work until July 2027. So maybe when that contract expires, they will come to us with a very large increase. God only knows. And then maybe we'll have to entertain something like you suggested. But in my opinion, until July 2027, we can make this work.
Just a comment regarding the fire truck for everybody. We need to recognize that the company that manufactures that truck is 20, 24 years old. They're no longer in business. Trying to get parts for it is pretty hard. I know my cousin was in the fire department for many years in LA. They used the same brand, had the same problems trying to get parts for it, and kind of same situation.
Yeah, and it was a significant manufacturer of trucks, so it was shocking to everybody when
It's like
they went out of
12 years
business.
ago, I think they went out of business.
Yep.
So if we've covered those topics, Mr. Crossman, maybe you could address the water question.
Mayor Crane, members of the council, good afternoon. Greg Crossman, General Manager of the Water Company. Yes, to address Ms. Barber's comments. First of all, I don't know, Stephanie, if you were here last week. But I watched it. Okay. So we went in depth on the two projects that were mentioned, the Silver Saddle project and the Peaceful Place project. I guess to back up a little bit and talk about the Carefree Water Consolidation Project in general, we bonded for that project at a very, very advantageous time period. We got very nice bond rates, we got good premiums. So that was the very, very positive side of it. The flip side of it was we also went into construction at a time period when construction costs were increasing at an astronomical rate. You can look at a lot of news reports recently about capital improvement programs in Scottsdale, Peoria, Glendale, Phoenix. They're all over budget. They're all underfunded. And we went into construction right at that time period. We started the project with a laundry list of things we wanted to do, and what we found out is that we needed to tighten our belt and figure out what things were absolutely necessary to do and which ones maybe could we try and get done in other ways. Silver Saddle is one of those projects, and unfortunately Peaceful Place was one of those projects. When we knew that Silver Saddle was going to drop out, we immediately applied for some federal funding. We got a community grant of $800,000. So a good portion of the $2 million we've requested will help fund and will represent our community match for that federal funding. So about $1.2 million of it will go to the Silver Saddle project, with $800,000 coming in from the feds. The remaining amount will go to Peaceful Place. So, in general, I think we've done an excellent job in constructing the water consolidation project in a time period when construction costs were really going out of control. So, and to only have cut the things that we did, I think is pretty amazing in what we did. And so we're asking for funding from the town. We're asking for a capital advance that we will eventually repay to the town, and to get these projects done so we can fulfill a good portion of what we committed to our residents. So hopefully that answers the question that you had.
So we're over budget.
I would say we have trimmed the budget so that we are within budget, but in order to do the Silver Saddle project and the Peaceful Place budget, we need an infusion of funds.
So those would be extra projects that weren't initially included?
They were included. They were never contracted for. They were anticipated as part of the projects, or part of the project. But again, when we saw what construction costs were doing, we needed to relook at what our priorities were and reprioritize essentially. And some of these have fallen by the wayside, but we are looking to get these done, and these two projects in particular.
Any comments or questions from council?
No, I just want to make sure from the public, everybody get that, heard that? Everybody good?
Greg?
Look,
Okay,
one understands
please, okay, yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. So, I think these two items were in the initial, description of the big picture. And in the end of the day, because of budget cost increases, you decided that these two items were not essential to the integration of the Cave Creek assets into our water company. But then you found you found a grant that helped at least with one of them, but to pull that off and then to do the Peaceful Place, you needed additional money. I think that's the bottom line.
That's correct, Mayor.
That's what we're talking about.
But did we disclose that to the buyers of the bond who saw that in the construction contract?
Those two projects were not described in the official statement for the deal.
Sure about that?
Yep, I just searched the official statement.
There was no specific description of project pieces in the bonding. There was general bond amount and bond funding, and the accomplishment of the water consolidation project and the transition of the 530 to 550 customers, but no specific pieces in the bond.
I would find it shocking that you would expect us to predict the supply chain issues, the cost of construction, the increased cost of construction, the increased cost of labor, the shortage of labor, and all of those combined to impact this project.
Sheila, the only thing I would say is the reason that I am expressing concern as a resident of Carefree is ultimately, as a resident of Carefree, I pay for this. Town doesn't pay for it, I pay for it out of my water bills. So I've already, agreed, not by my choice, but by your choice, agreed to $32 million, and now I'm being asked for another $2 million. And my question would be is this $2 million we have to spend now? And these projects absolutely have to be done now. If you have already carved those out because you could foresee that we didn't need to do them, they were not critical projects, why are we asking for another $2 million on top of the $32 million that we're already incurring without residents getting an opportunity to really understand what's going on and understanding whether or not that could be something that could be put off for another day?
Okay, but I would like to be technically correct and say the deal was $18.5 million. It was not $32 million. Secondly, neighborhoods A, B, and C are expected to generate $1 million a year through their water rates as well as a special $20 a month surcharge. The bond's principal and interest due annually is $1 million a year. So the bulk of payments to the water debt are coming from the new customers. So yes, it's debt of the water system, but the rates and charges were set in order for the new customers to pay the debt. Now, having said that, there was also, I believe, $2.5 million, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, that was used for the old system improvements. Okay, so $3.5 million that is being paid for primarily by the new water customers with the $1 million that they're generating annually. You're shaking your head, but.
It actually was 2 million.
Yeah, but
the choice is ours to whether to fund these projects or not. The choice is the councils and the boards. My recommendation is that we do it. The time is right. We've got $800,000 of federal grant money. It would be a shame to turn that away and not construct the project.
So the grant money has a life.
The grant money does have a life.
So
yes.
there's a potential to not complete the projects now, that we lose the 800K, and let's say we wait a year, 2 years, 5 years. How much more will it cost us to get to these projects which are needed? Another 2 million?
That's
3 million?
That's a good
4 million?
question. I wish I had a crystal ball to know
Okay.
what's happening with construction costs, but I can tell you they're not going down. They're not going up as fast as they did during our construction period. Luckily, things seem to be getting under control, but they're not going the opposite direction, and they are
And
still.
in the interim, those folks who are going to get these fire hydrants won't have fire hydrants.
Correct. There will be then the fire protection that we showed at the last meeting would not be put in place.
But Greg, just to set the record straight, if we do the math from the beginning of the borrowing, we borrowed 18.5 million at about 2.9%. That'll be repaid over 30 years, amortized, by multiple generational users. And as Sheila pointed out, that'll be paid primarily by the new ratepayers, the 550 new connections that are being made. But to set the record even further, if you add 18.5 million plus the 2.5 million that was paid to acquire the system and the accounts, my math says that's $21 million, not $32 million. The difference will be amortized as part of the principal payments. So I really have a theoretical question for you. If I buy a house for $100,000 and I pay $1,000 a month for that house over 30 years, is the cost of that house $100,000 or is it $360,000?
Mayor, council members, I think you know the answer to that question. It's the cost of the house, and amortization is interest payments, and that's what we all have to live with and deal with and factor into purchasing whatever. That's one rationale on why we bond for money and why we spread it out and amortize it over a period of time so that it can be spread out over multiple generations of customers, residents, as opposed to us paying it all up front now.
So just to, and the way I'm thinking about this, I believe personally it would be unconscionable to leave these people behind and not put those fire hydrants in. Yes, it's a little pain, it's gonna cost us some money, but they are part of Carefree, like all of us.
You know, obviously, if we had the 18.5 we needed, we'd have written a check. But we didn't. We're a small town. So the interest expense, of course, that's what you pay in order to have access to that level of capital in that short a time frame to be used. So we're fortunate, very fortunate, that we worked very diligently, as you recall, trying to get this done as quickly as we could because we knew interest rates would be going up. Imagine if we had to, those same funds, we were now paying 5.5% versus 2.9, whatever the number is. So I'm glad we got it done when we did.
Any other comments from council? Okay, very good, thank you, good discussion. Okay, item number 2, adjournment.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all for participating.